And good morning. Yeah, here we are, week 206. It is the day before the 4th of July. That would make it July 3rd. And yeah, here we are I always look at 4th of July as midsummer. Here we are, half the summer. Already days are now getting shorter, although they don't seem like it. But we're well into the journey. We're looking at John chapter 16, which is deep within the upper room discourse and interaction with the disciples. In just a few hours, Jesus will be arrested and the crucifixion events will begin. And Jesus is preparing his disciples for what next. And so let's dive into it and take a look. Last time we looked at the disciples being introduced to something very new and different, and that is the role of the coming helper. Jesus has been with them, guiding them through their discipleship process, and there's going to be a handoff because he's leaving to go to the Father, of which they are very confused about. And in his place will be the helper. And he is explaining that relationship in numerous ways, using numerous metaphors to do that. Jesus identifies the new something as the helper, and he describes the helper as a guide. So we've really dove into that idea of guide, and that has directed our thoughts. The disciples must therefore learn to adapt to being guided by the helper and guided in real time is the idea. What's true of the disciples is true of you and me. And we too are to be guided by the helper. And we spent some time last time discussing what this means for you and me. So that's kind of an overall view of what we looked at last time. The text reads, "A little while, and you, disciples, no longer are going to see me. And again, a little while, and you will see me." So some of the disciples said to one another, "What is this that he is telling us? A little while, and you are not going to see me. And again, a little while, and you will see me. And because I'm going to the Father." So they were saying, "What is this that he says? A little while." We do not know what he is talking about. And that's our text for this morning. Okay, we're going to do a series of slides by review. It's been my attempt to introduce various metaphors, images, illustrations that can hopefully bring some clarity to different aspects of what Jesus is talking about at this very critical juncture in their discipleship. And so the first one we looked at was the one that John White sent me, the man who has created the image, and he is sitting in front of the fire that he's created, thinking that that fire is actually giving him warmth. It's a very, very provoking image, and I think very truthful to where we are generally as humans. The disciples are in a state of struggle, and I would like to make the statement that it's an understandable struggle. It's a struggle that I've experienced on numerous occasions. It's a struggle of which I am not exempt from, and I believe that it's true of everybody on the call. There is a sense of struggle, misunderstanding, unknowing within our discipleship process, of which the disciples are illustrating, going through at this very moment. So I go back to verse 12, although we're in verse 16 through 18, to pick up on this idea that's now we're looking at in these verses. Jesus says, I have many more things to say to you, but you cannot bear them at this present time. We've looked at that. Jesus is fully aware of their unknowingness of what is going on. Their struggle is because the disciples are attempting to fit what Jesus is saying into their existing frame of reference. They have a way of thinking, and they're trying to take what Jesus is saying and fitting it into that. And this is the only way any of us can understand anything. It's part of being human. And I've got a little micro illustration here of what I mean by this. If the dot represents the known, it's something that is known. The only way we can move to the unknown is from the known. If I don't have a known position, if I don't have a place to stand, and Jesus is explaining something new, I have no understanding. I have no grid to work from. That I must, in order to understand, I have to be in a place of correlation, a place of unity, a place of stance that I understand before I can be directed to something that which is unknown. So that's kind of a given. And there currently is no category in their minds matching what Jesus is telling them. They have no grid, no category for what he's saying. So understandably, they are in struggle, attempting to make sense of what he's telling them through what they already know. You know, they've got a grid, and so they're trying to fit basically a square peg into a round space. And this is as we share this as human beings, this is our universal human struggle as well. We call it, understanding spirituality, for instance, things that are unknown, the mysteries that are introduced in the scriptures, attempting to get our heads around things. And that is just part of being human. So that was one analogy. Another analogy, and I'm taking some time here because it's going to lead us to a point. I talked briefly, we've talked about this in the past, about layers of understanding. And it happens to be my belief, and this model helps me understand me, and it helps me understand the people around me. And I am of the belief that there are layers of understanding, and this is not a new idea by any means. I just didn't pull this out of a hat. But the idea that you and I have to have one layer of need satisfied before we can really grasp the next layer. And so I've got those up here. And I believe the disciples are, now this is me, I think the disciples as a group are operating from what I would call a late layer 3. There is a major event just around the corner, the crucifixion. And they as a group need to go through that in order to go to layer 4, which is the inclusion of the negative. They are not there yet. And that is the major step in transformation, this idea of inclusion of the negative. There is nothing positive about the crucifixion event. Is it fair that Jesus is going to the cross for them? Absolutely not. They would reject the idea of their master and king and leader being sent to death. And we're going to see it in the text. And so they got to go through a very painful set of circumstances in their discipleship process to move them into what I've identified as layer 4 in their discipleship. And that is just around the corner. They require a breakthrough so something new can occur. And again, it ties into the idea there has to be a known before something unknown can be grasped. And that, in this case, is a breakthrough that they're going to experience through the cross and the resurrection ascents. And when he states right in the opening text, "I will see you again," he's referencing the post-resurrection appearances of the disciples, or to the disciples. And this only happens, this breakthrough, I just don't know of any other way. There's the only way that I can move from point A to point B is through a letting go. There's got to be a letting go. I have to let go of something before something new can begin. That is where I'm coming from, my belief. And then the last analogy that we've been using the last few weeks is the grid. And the grid is like this. It has the Father. We understand the idea of God Almighty as being as residing outside of His creation. That's my belief, and I would think that you guys would think that as well, that the Father exists outside of the creation, but He is the creator, and from the Father, as God Almighty, Jesus, I'm using the words of Jesus, that He calls God Almighty the Father, that everything emanates from the Father. And there are two aspects of that. There's the known material world represented by the globe. And there is what I have illustrated as this grid that exists would be the non-material aspects of His presence. Notice the grid is moving in all directions, because it's my belief that God's presence transcends the material world, the globe that we sit on. And there is a non-material presence of God represented by the Helper that existed in the first century and that exists in our life of 2024. And I think that would be theologically in line with how us Christians believe, but in a practical sense, it's my belief that much of us, or many of us, become what I would call a theist by practice. A theist is one who believes in a creator, and functionally the creator created the world and then just kind of set things in motion, and I'm left here by myself. The creator will intercede at times in miraculous events, but I'm pretty much here on my own to figure it out. Now, I think most of us as Christians say, well, I reject that. But at a functionality level, it is so difficult for us to talk about what it's like to be directed by the Spirit of God in the here and now. We don't really have good language for it. And this is exactly what we're talking about when Jesus is instructing His disciples. There's going to be a helper, and He is going to guide you just like I have guided you. And it will be a non-physical presence that is here, different than eyeball to eyeball, but it will be a presence, and that's represented by the grid. So that's what we've talked about. Now we're going to move from this to where the text is in verse 16 through 18. So we use the grid as our analogy, and we're going to continue on with this idea. And I've drawn a box. And that box arbitrarily represents the first century in Palestine, where the disciples were living, their slice of the pie, their slice of reality, which included the physical world and the non-material world. The disciples lived within the box at a particular time, at a particular place, and it's represented by the box. They knew their portion to some degree, just as we know our portion to some degree. That's the connection I'm making. They knew pieces of it, but they didn't know everything about it. And I think that's just part of being human. Their box, if I were to draw our box, it would be in a different spot. Maybe it would be in the same spot, but at a different time. If we lived in the Middle East, our part of the world would be a different place on the globe and at a different time. But our box is still a box. So let's start with their box and let's look at it. So I'm going to blow that box up, and there it is, what their world consisted of. And there's the box. And this is just a blown up version of what you saw on the prior slide. And there's a lot of symbols that represent ideas that actually go back to very early in this study that we developed and created a master slide showing symbolically the world that Jesus was entering in, and we called it loosely the jungle. And the jungle has aspects. The incarnation was induced into this world system that exists, and that's depicted by these little arrows that you see on the screen. I'll explain those. So what does the world consist of? There's, first of all, the material existence, and that's represented by this. You guys can see this little area of the globe like this, and that represents Palestine in the first century AD. They're part of the material world. Their existence standing on the planet Earth within their particular place and time. And that's certainly true. But we haven't talked about this for years, literally. But within that, what was true from the very beginning, and we derived this from the book of Genesis way early on to set up, we set up the scene for the incarnation. But the human propensity, there are three from Genesis 4 that we've set up, and they've been true of the world ever since, and they're true today. There's this idea of conquering that exists. Conquering is part of their world. Palestine has been under a foreign rule for decades, for centuries, and they know the idea of conquer. They are second-class citizens, and they view the Samaritans as under them. So there's this whole class system way of thinking that has to do with conquering. It existed then, and it exists now. There was comparison in their system, and it's the idea that of profiling one individual or group over another. Am I superior than, or am I less than? And that way of thinking existed. It was inaugurated at the beginning, right in Genesis 4, through the stories of Cain. That's where we got these, Cain and Abel. But it exists today all around us. There's this comparison going on. And then lastly, the three C's, I call it contrariness. That's the idea of humans coming to disagreement and then separating. If there is a if I say it's black, the next person will say it's white, and that reality right there doesn't bring us together. It tends to separate. And we, in our culture in which we live right now, separation, anxiety, anger, hatred is absolutely paramount all around us. And very true. These things, conquering, comparison, contrariness, are true, were true then and true now, and very much part of their world. Now, transposed over that or through that is this grid that I've highlighted. And this is the position that this is the person of Jesus is speaking from this perspective of God's presence in the here and now. There is more to it than they're seeing. And that's where it is. This grid is all over everything. God's presence exists within this jungle context, and that's represented by this grid. This grid is there. This is true of their world. How much they see of it, we'll talk about that, but this is true. So Jesus has a couple phrases from that grid that they are really struggling with. This idea of a little while and this idea of I go to the Father. They really don't get that at all. And they've clearly stated, but that's part of their world. Now, in the foreground of this world, right now in front of them, the disciples are here as a group, and they're discussing here in verses 16 through 18, and they're interacting, trying to understand what Jesus is saying right here. And so there's this dialogue going on, and there is a lot of questions going on and confusion at this time. This is their world. This represents, what is happening, both at the material level and also at the non-material level. There's a reality going on, but then the question is, what do they understand? Well, it's quite different. Notice the box is still there, but what they see is just what's happening right in front of their noses. And that is an interaction with Jesus. The disciples are here receiving, and Jesus is speaking promise of what will be for them here in the near future. And let's see what else I have here. And they're not seeing everything. There's much more to it, but they don't see it. So they fail to comprehend what Jesus is talking about right here. And this is my attempt to explain the confusion, because what is happening to them from their perspective is behind a curtain. It's there on the stage, but it's behind a curtain, and the curtain is down. And the reason the curtain is down, and it goes back to my understanding of the human development, is they have not been at this point. It's where they are in their journey. They're from my perspective, late layer 3, and they have not yet learned how to include the negative, which is right around the corner. They're going to get a major dose. So they're in confusion, as it says in the text. And this is what layer 4 is all about. Is they are they're at a wall, and they've got to break through this wall through their experience. So that brings us back to the text. And now I'm just going to read the text from that perspective, where Jesus is saying, a little while and you no longer are going to see me, and again a little while and you will see me. And so some of the disciples said to one another, they're in their group, and they said, what is this he's telling us? We just don't get it. A little while and you're not going to see me, and again a little while and you will see me, because I'm going to the Father. So they were saying, what is this that he's saying? A little while. And they make the statement, we just don't know what he's talking about. And so there's this whole idea of the what. And it's no different than what you and I experience in our discipleship journey. There is nothing wrong with these guys. They're just guys, they're men. But these men have a community what is going on, just the same way as you and I experience the what within our journey. They clearly do not understand. The text reads. Now, there is a value to this. They're stating we don't understand, and I'm saying that that is a good thing. The value of this is that they are beginning to understand that they don't understand. That is a major step forward as they are moving towards this barrier. This is because they are becoming aware. It's like they're waking up to what's actually exists. Remember the grid? We talked about what their world consisted of. They're seeing maybe 5% of what is really going on, to put a percentage on it, because of this big, thick curtain that exists. But yet now they're going, oh, maybe there's more to this. They're becoming aware, and that's through the statement, we don't know what he's talking about. They know that they don't know, and that is really good. What they are now aware of is their own confusion around the term a little while. And that's stated 3 times. And it's this idea of seeing and not seeing. That really gets them confused, which it would me as well. You know, we definitely have an advantage because we got the rest of the story and they did not. Inclusive to their confusion is a second statement going to the Father. And again, they don't understand that as well. So let's look at that. And they're in confusion. Here are the disciples, and they're here in this group state, and they're talking, they're verbally talking and interacting. And what they expect is something they can get their heads around. Grasp is the term I use. Connect, understand, visualize, whatever that word is, they are expecting something with that end that they could, something they could sink their teeth in. That's not happening. If that were to happen, it would represent continuity in their thinking. That means they're at point A, they're at their state right here, and they're in a state of understanding. And what is being spoken here by Jesus, they can connect. And so there would be a continuity. Well, if they don't understand here, if they're confused here, they can't make any connection to here. That's the point. Continuity. There's got to be something they understand. All they see is discontinuity. They see garbled, like, remember in the analogy of used in the past of the dot to dot. They turn the page to all the dots with the numbers, and all they see are dots. They see no image. They see no connection. They see dots. And that is troubling. They're really trying to understand, just like you and I, at times in our journey, we're trying to understand. And we're struggling. And this is just common in our journey. So they're trying to understand. The value in all this is that they're becoming aware, as I stated before. They are now, they've stated, we don't understand. So they understand that they don't understand. And this is what they're becoming aware of. This is the step they've taken towards this barrier. Number one, a little while, and that's 3 times. They did not understand the time disruption. I'm calling it a time disruption, little while. Such an event does not fit with how they collectively thought how the next steps ought to be. They all believed that Jesus was, probably they had different perceptions of the idea of Messiah, but they knew that he was a very important and powerful and influential person for what was about to happen. Let's just say generally they believed that he was the Savior, the one they were waiting for. But they all had various degrees, different ideas of what that meant, but none of it meant a time disruption. They would look at he is there to accomplish something, and they probably anticipated that what was about to happen was monumental. But what that was, they didn't know because they didn't have a grid of what that will be, some sort of conquering and overpowering. But in no way did they understand it as a time disruption. There would be a timeout. They they didn't have a grid for that. The second phrase, going to the Father, they did not understand the spatial separation. Well, how could a conqueror conquer if the conqueror is not present? That did not make sense to them, which is understandable. Still totally understandable. Why would the master ever leave his post to leave the students to fend for themselves? Of course, he said, I'm not going to leave you comfortless or as orphans. I'm sending the helper. That's the whole point of the helper. But they just don't, they are not grasping this. Now, a side note, they've all experienced, and this is how I understand things, they've all experienced the witness, the raising of Lazarus, this whole idea of conquering death. But what that meant to them at the time, who knows? It certainly didn't give them light into the immediate situation. And I think that's just part of being human. We tend to believe what we want to believe, and we have a hard time correlating things, especially when we have no basis to stand on. This is the struggle of being human. And we kind of think, well, why don't they get it? Because I wouldn't get it. Because it just doesn't work that way. What is actually occurring? So again, this ties into the slide of, what is actually occurring in the box before we put the curtain. So this is a thing where I call it timeout, because I think this is pretty important for us. So, timeout here with the hand. As we ponder their confusion, we certainly understand it. We don't point fingers. But it's a good idea for us to remember that at this moment, on this very occasion, they are being guided. And I'm using the words of Jesus. Jesus connects the guide to the helper, which is future. But Jesus's presence up to this point, he is also a guide. So they are still being guided at this moment, although they think they don't know it. But they are being guided. Jesus has a hold of them. Jesus is not freaking out at all. He's got to face some very difficult circumstances How he faces that is, we'll talk more about that. I don't, that is just so beyond me how he could enter into that and go through all that, but he did. It says for the joy that was set before him. That just is mind blowing to me. But we'll talk about that when we get there. They are being acted upon. This is what we got to get. This is so good. I mean, not because I'm saying it, but the disciples are being acted upon in this very moment by a guide who loves them and is leading them. He hasn't abandoned them. He understands their struggle, but they are just only partially aware of what is going on. And it's Jesus who's going to lead these disciples to where their next steps are. He's doing it in spite of them. Therefore, what is occurring is not about his journey, like going to the Father. Rather, it's all about their journey. That is really, I think, something to think about. Because I have tended to think about, and I still do, think about this event that Jesus is facing for me. I don't tend to think about what this event is going to do for me. It's really about their journey. The main focus here is their journey. It's what they is where he is leading them, and the cross event is the means by which that will occur. That's a different, I don't think we throw the other out, but I think it's pretty apparent here. Jesus is taking them somewhere. They are being guided at this moment to where in their journey they will be next. It sounds so fundamental and a bit trite, but it's pretty powerful. Think about guiding someone on the river. Here's, a river guide using, from my little experience and world, is that a guide is there committed to the student. And it's up to the student what he wants to get. And the student can fight back. The student can ignore. The student can do his own thing. But the guide is there to move that student to where that student can be. The guide has the vision. And it's all about what the student must go through. The student's going to go through what the student goes through. In some cases, the student can be pliable and listen. A lot of cases, the student says, well, I'm going to do it my way regardless. And the guide says, go ahead, knock yourself out. I'm in no hurry, but I'm here committed to you. And it'll take what it takes. That's the beauty of, we are safe within his arms, and we are being guarded regardless, and in spite of me. Because this is all that I explained here. This is what guides do. Guides are there committed. Guides just don't leave. The guides are there to guide. It is therefore about their active participation in being guided, their ability to listen, to receive instruction, to try this, to try that, to observe. That what I call active participation. And this has everything to do with letting go. I've got to let go of my framework before I can be guided to another level of proficiency and understanding and a different enlightenment into a different reality. I've got to move, I've got to listen and receive if I'm going to move anywhere. And it's no different, fellas, that what Jesus is saying over and over and over again. The problem is we as human beings tend to put my efforts onto it and say, I got to do it. And I'm going to invite Jesus along. And the truth is, he is taking us somewhere, regardless, whether in spite of us. And we've got to go through what we got to go through. Letting go is what transforms a question mark into a possibility. That student angler can be doing the same thing over and over and over again with no success. But if that student listens to the angler can guide that student to areas, to another way, another methodology, another way of thinking, another way of seeing, and can actually bring help to that student. And then the student says, "Huh, I get it. I really get it. Oh, why did it take me so long?" Because it takes what it takes. They will know. They will know. The disciples are going to know. It's not if they're going to know. They're going to know because they are being guided. It's not about them and how proficient, how many verses they know, how many books they've read, how much they go to church, whatever we attach as being spiritual. It's about him, his commitment to them. Whoa. Now, we got about 20 minutes. Within this session, we talked about the confusion around being guided. And that's right where these disciples are. They're in a state of confusion. By faith, and it is by faith, you and I in the 21st century believe that we too are being guided. We say we do. We say we believe that. Let's talk about this. On one hand, what is it like for you to be guided? We all want to hear what you have to say. What is it like to be guided by the Spirit of God, the helper? What does it feel like? What are your confusions, your questions, your doubts? But there's another side too. On the other hand, there was the first hand, now there's the second hand. There is no third hand. On the other hand, what are you learning in your discipleship about being guided? Maybe you've just had some really great breakthroughs in understanding. We'd like to hear that. What are you getting good at? Dare I use the river analogy? And feel free, no one's going to view you as prideful or arrogant by any means. What do you feel you're good at? And we'd all like to hear that. So let's talk about these. And the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Recently, I've been, I guess the word I want is, I've been confronted by the reality that I didn't understand who owns me.
Huh.
Um, And it's been really helpful to start to understand that I don't own me. I'm owned by the Creator.
Uh, yeah.
Um, and, I live in a house that was built by a contractor. I bought it. I own the house. Um, I bought, I own a Honda. Honda built it, but I bought it. I own it. And so for most of my life, I've gone through this idea that I own myself. God was my guide. But I've been confronted with the idea that God owns me.
Hmm.
And I am a steward of every decision that I make. In every situation I'm in, I'm to be acting and making decisions as under the understanding that I'm a steward of a life that God created me and He owns me, and I have stewardship of that as I walk the earth.
Wow. Thank you, Bob. That is quite a different perspective. What you're saying, there's a lot of the same elements, the car, there is ownership, but in trueness, you come to a different understanding of your place in reality.
Right.
And that's a major shift.
So
I think
Bob, what brought that on? What happened or changed or?
Well, I think I've referenced this. This is a very slow read that I'm in right now. I have a book that's called Do You Believe? And it's 12 essential doctrines of the Christian faith. And one of the doctrines is the doctrine of creation, in which this question of ownership is presented. And that's where it just sent me on that whole line of thinking of I don't own myself. I was created by God. Everyone in the world is created by God, and we have a stewardship responsibility.
Yeah.
Everyone in all, in the whole time of creation, it has had this question of who owns you.
That is something really great to ponder, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, I think too, Bob, when you come to the realization that you are created, that you have a creator, you have to ask yourself, did he just create me to exist?
Right.
So I can sit on a shelf and be something that he can look at and that he created, or did he create me for a purpose? And what is that purpose? And for this question Mike's asking, when it says, what does it feel like to be guided? For me, it answers the question, am I doing what God created me to do? Am I fulfilling the purpose that God created me for? And if I am, then I'm being guided.
Right.
If I'm not, then I have, like Mike said, I've turned away from the guide and I'm doing my own thing as I try to navigate this whatever trail I'm on or whatever river I'm on. I'm doing it on my own, and most of the time I'm messing it up. I'm not
Yeah,
I'm not doing what or I'm not I don't like the word successful, but I'm not being faithful in what God has called me to in life. What is, what's my purpose? God created me.
Right.
So what's my purpose? And if I'm fulfilling that purpose, then I'm being guided. If I'm not, then I've missed the mark in being guided.
yeah, it's good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Josh.
Doobie doobie.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. Well, I have a question also, Bob. We're not picking on you, but what you said has really stirred us up. When you've been pondering that idea that you are owned, it's happening to you, and that's a big deal. How has that affected, or has it affected how you view other human beings around you?
Um, yeah, part of this thing of being created, we've been created in the image of God. What does that mean? I've always had that question. What does that
Yeah.
mean, and what does that look like? And it's helped me, I think, to understand people and to see people in a different light, that I'm starting to realize that God's character, his potential for character, his potential for what we call Christian living,
Yeah.
is present in everyone on earth.
Yeah.
And so I see people, I'm not there yet, but I'm starting to see people in a totally different light,
Mhm.
because I think I'm starting to realize that in Romans, it talks about everyone knows. I used to call it the God-shaped vacuum.
Yeah.
It's in Romans 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone has that. And I'm starting to see that as being the image of God that was in that creation, that he gave them the ability to understand
Yeah.
and know what was right and what was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for tackling that one, Bob. That's helpful to all. Any other either questions for Bob or other comments that you guys would have?
Mike, you've got on the screen there, what does it feel like
Yeah.
in regard to being guided? And I from my own experience, it a lot of times doesn't feel like I'm being guided until afterward.
Yeah.
And then I look back and I can see having been guided, but at the time, I'm like the disciples, don't understand, or I don't see it. I see the white water. I don't see the person in the raft with me, so to speak,
Yeah.
until after I've come through it.
Yeah. But what you're saying is that going through it is one thing, but then afterwards there's some kind of realization that is it in your mind, or do you feel it in your body anywhere?
Most of the time it's more almost sort of empirical. It's like, oh, I look at how the circumstances sort of, I'll just say, fell out to me, and all of a sudden I see the pattern, or how the dots were connected.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, there was something more happening going on there. I couldn't see at the time when I was just moving from dot to dot, but then
Yeah.
there's a pattern there of God working in ways that I couldn't see in the midst of it.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Mike, another thought I had, and your version is a little bit different than mine. I was reading out of the NIV, and let me back up a little bit. In verse 7, he says, "But very truly I tell you, it is for your good that I'm going. Unless I go away, the advocate will not come to you.
Yeah, that's really.
But if I go, I will send him to you." So one of the things that in answer to how kind of what it feels like, an advocate is somebody who is for you, somebody who is standing before the Father and saying, I'm here to talk to you about Jeff or whatever. But he is, if I feel like, as I was saying before, I'm doing things that are part of the purpose that God created for me, then I know that the advocate is there advocating for me, he's there helping me do the right thing and then telling me, Jeff, you're doing the right thing. If I'm not hearing in that still small voice that, hey, that was the right thing to do, then I'm not listening to the advocate.
Yeah, I like that term myself, Jeff. Thank you. Everything Jesus is saying to his followers is about for them and their benefit. It's all for them. And again, the human propensity is that I'm not good enough. I don't measure up. I'm doing something wrong. And that is the big disconnect.
When Jesus stood on the shore and he said, cast your net on the other side of the boat.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Duh.
More than they could pull in.
Right.
Yeah.
But cast your net on the other side of the boat, guys.
Yeah.
So Mike, back to you. Do you feel like you're being guided? And if so, where do you feel like you're being guided to? Or is it being guided to understanding? Or just what do you feel like you're being guided?
Oh, you're picking on me again, John. You do.
Oh, I am. We only got a minute, so it can't go too far.
Well, I would piggyback on what a question I asked Bob, because what I've been dwelling on is how my perception is changing towards other human beings, everybody. It's just, I can honestly say that I'm more and more falling in love with other human beings. I mean, love is it's about a journey in love. When I ask Martha behind the counter at Dazbog Coffee, I don't even know Martha, but at that moment, there's a connection and a caring. And I don't think it's manufactured. I think it is something that is happening. And Martha can sense that, and I can sense that. I have no other agenda other than to extend love. It's not about knowledge, although knowledge is a piece of it. It's about enjoying and being engaged at the moment in what actually exists in this interaction, whether through another human being or through a time in creation. If it's a walk from my house, the beauty of what is happening. And I can honestly say I'm becoming more aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think it resonates with you guys. I think we all are, and it's kind of like getting out of the way. So
I have a recent experience about that. If you give me another 30 seconds.
Yes, go. Yes, Dave, please.
Up at my up at the cabin, I have a longtime neighbor who has a beautiful place down on Pennant Creek, very much in the midst of the forest down there in the creek bottom. He's a very independent, very capable guy, retired Denver fire chief. All the rest of this, he's owned longer than I have, so it's been 50 years.
Wow.
Back in May, we had this wind incident up there, and there was a lot of damage. The power was down, and all the rest of this. And he had planned to come up several days after that anyway. He was going to be up there. And he told me, he says, it's the first time in years that I've come up with nothing to do. I got the place fixed up. Everything is the way I want it. He'd spent a lot of time during beetle kill, getting rid of trees and tending things, and everything's in a beautiful, beautiful setting.
Yeah.
He showed up, and 25 to 30 of his trees had blown over onto his cabin, onto his storage thing. These were, most of these, there were some pine, but many of these were firs and spruce. Some of them 60, 70 feet tall had blown over.
Wow.
And he was just stunned. He just stunned. So when I found out, I went over to visit with him. And I said, John, I said, you know me a little bit, but you don't know me all that well. And he says, yeah, I kind of know you. And I says, well, words kind of fail me right now, John. So here's what I'm going to do. You guys know me pretty well. So I reached out and I hugged John. Didn't say anything because there weren't any words.
Yeah.
And he looked back at me with tears in his eyes and he said, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's what he means. So it's that reaching out in love. It's that being sensitive to other people about where they are and what they need. And it isn't always words. It isn't knowledge, like you say. It's not about knowledge. It's about love. And John is not one of those guys that I would have anticipated accepting even a hug, but he needed one. So you give people what they need.
That's neat, Dave. Yeah. And that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. John White, great question. And we're going to wrap up. It's 8:04. And guys, thanks for coming. I will not be on next week or the week after. The next week is the 10th and the 17th, but we'll be back on the 24th. And I know, I think Steve and I think you guys get together, Vince and John White and all that, but you guys have a good few weeks and of course, obviously be looking forward to being back together with you guys. Great discussion this morning, fellas. Thank you. John, Bob, thanks again for your question, your insight of where you are in your journey. That was really helpful. So see you all. Bye now.
See you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Mike.
Bye.